Chapter 1. The adrenaline rush of a Level 1 trauma was Lyra Vance's drug of choice, her cathedral a pristine, sterile space where the chaos of a broken world yielded to the authority of a scalpel. At 29, Lyra was not just the chief of trauma surgery at St. Jude's Memorial. She was the unflinching high priestess of the verifiable, a surgical savant whose focus was so absolute it often felt like a spiritual discipline. She dealt only in measurable realities, millimeters of incision, milliliters of blood loss, the ticking certainty of a cardiac monitor. Tonight, however, certainty bled out on the floor. The initial report screamed of disaster. Motorcycle versus sedan, male, mid-20s, unhelmeted. Probable flail chest, massive hemorrhage, estimated arrival 3 minutes. Prep the rapid infuser. Orthopedics on a stat page. Though I suspect they'll be too late for this one. Lyra's voice was a low, controlled current beneath the rising tide of alarm. If you're watching us for the first time, remember to hit the subscribe button so you can get more stories like this and more, and let us know where you're watching from. The gurney slammed through the doors, delivering not a patient, but a wreckage of human fragility. Mikey, the young man, was already flirting with the brink. Lyra's hands, clad in surgical gloves, were instantly on him, seeking the bleeding heart of the problem. BP 8050 falling, massive free fluid in the abdomen, splenic lac almost certainly, Dr. Chen confirmed, his voice strained. Prep for immediate X-lap. We run, people, Lyra ordered, her focus a steel spike aimed at the internal bleed. But as she moved to stabilize the thorax, her gaze snagged on the lower half of the gurney. Mikey's right leg was a disaster, a compound fracture of the tibia and fibula that defied geometry. The skin was a thin, agonizing tent over a protruding shard of white bone. The limb was functionally dead, awaiting inevitable amputation. Then the insidious, familiar heat began. It wasn't the nervous warmth of adrenaline. It was a profound internal thrum, a vibration that resonated deep in her forearms. Lyra had felt it 3 times before, always in moments of extreme, unavoidable damage, and each time she had fiercely, frantically repressed it, labeling it a stress-induced neurological anomaly. This time, the logical part of her mind failed, overwritten by a primordial, powerful instinct. Ignoring the traction splint, bypassing the science of stabilization, Lyra did the inexplicable. She cupped the mangled limb with her gloved hands. She did not pull. She did not manipulate. She simply willed the change. A soft, golden energy, visible only in the internal theater of her mind, flared outward. Lyra experienced the bone as raw data, shattered vectors that demanded realignment. With a force that defied physics, she mentally compelled the calcium and collagen to submit. She heard an infinitesimal, grainy clack as the bone ends, impossibly, slid into perfect anatomical congruence. The transformation was absolute, terrifying, and immediate. In less than 40 seconds, the grotesque angle was gone. The shard of bone retracted. The limb, while bruised and shocking, was straight. The compound fracture, the one that had minutes ago guaranteed amputation, was gone. Dr. Chen staggered back, his face a mask of bewildered terror. Lyra! What the hell did you just do? That was physically impossible. Lyra felt her own heart trying to jackhammer its way out of her chest. The heat was receding, leaving a deep, exhausting cold. She ripped off the gloves, stuffing her hands into the pockets of her scrubs as if they were biological weapons. Accidental reduction, she gasped, the lie tasting like ash. Violent muscle spasms, it settled during repositioning. Pure, incredible luck. The explanation was an absurdity, but in the face of the hemorrhaging abdomen, Lyra's colleagues were forced to accept the narrative and return to the crisis at hand. As Mikey was rushed to the OR, Lyra was left alone, adrift in the wreckage of her scientific worldview. She hadn't just practiced medicine, She had performed an act of arcane engineering, bone weaving. Her mind shrieked the name her late grandmother, a woman she had dismissed as a fanciful crank obsessed with ancient family folklore, had once whispered. It was a terrifying, undeniable truth. She possessed an inherited power that nullified natural law. She scrubbed her hands until they were raw and angry, trying to scour away the residue of the golden heat, trying to drown the memory of the impossible clack of mended bone beneath the clinical, reassuring scent of disinfectant. Science. It has to be science. A highly localized, undiscovered bioelectrical discharge. She was a rationalist. She was not a weaver of fate. The thorn in the side. For 4 weeks, Lyra maintained the illusion of normalcy. Mikey was healing at an unprecedented, clinically dubious rate, and Lyra avoided the orthopedics team, terrified of the questions they were too polite or too stunned to ask. Then, the axe fell. The news was a corporate shockwave. St. Jude's Memorial, facing crippling operational debt, had been absorbed by the Thorn conglomerate. The takeover was less a merger and more an occupation, cold, swift, and absolute. The name Thorn carried an ominous, monolithic weight in the financial world, synonymous with ruthless, asset-stripping efficiency. The new CEO was scheduled for a single site visit and a perfunctory address to the hospital's key leadership. Lyra, as the chief of the most volatile department, found herself confined to a sterile conference room, the forced smiles and nervous small talk of her colleagues grating on her already frayed nerves. The door opened precisely at the appointed time, and the air immediately changed. It wasn't just silence. It was a palpable pressure drop. Kalen Thorne entered the room, and he did not look like a CEO. He looked like a sovereign. He was a man built for command, tall, impossibly lean, yet clearly corded with immense power. His black, bespoke suit was tailored so sharply it appeared to be not fabric, but a sculpted layer of armor. His movement was economical, predatory, the silent grace of a hunter surveying his new territory. His features were severe, carved from something ancient and cold, but it was his eyes that seized Lyra's breath. They were pure, polished obsidian, flecked with luminous gold that gave his gaze a chilling intensity. They held the stillness of a deep, dark forest, utterly devoid of warmth, absolutely focused. Kalen ignored the cringing financial staff, the flustered hospital administrator, and the outstretched, sycophantic hands. His gaze was a laser beam that cut through the room, sweeping past the doctors and locking, with terrifying precision, onto Lyra Vance. It was the steady, unnervingly quiet appraisal of a hunter who has finally cornered his prey. Dr. Vance, his voice was a deep, resonant baritone, a vibration that seemed to bypass her ears and register directly in the golden phantom heat of her palms. Chief of Trauma Surgery, highly rated. Mr. Thorne, Lyra replied, rising slightly in her seat, unwilling to concede ground to this unsettling figure. Her professionalism was a shield, brittle but necessary. He didn't discuss revenue streams or efficiency models. He leaned both hands on the conference table, his gaze remaining fixed on Lyra, a king addressing a subject. I am not concerned with the tertiary costs of this organization, Kalen announced, his voice carrying the finality of stone. My only immediate concern is the quality of the emergency staff's touch. The phrase was a bizarre, chilling echo of her own internal turmoil. Lyra felt her mind reel. This wasn't corporate jargon. This was a direct, targeted question. He hadn't bought a hospital. He had bought the container for his prize. A nervous neurosurgeon stammered, Sir, our staff is certified. We have state-of-the-art procedures. Kalen's obsidian eyes never left Lyra. He cut the surgeon off with a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Procedures are measurable. Touch is a covenant. I've reviewed the case files of the recently recovered, a young man named Mikey. A severe trauma. Lyra felt the sudden, paralyzing onset of dread. He hadn't just reviewed the files, he had decoded them. The orthopedic anomaly in Mr. Mikey's femur fracture is statistically impossible, Kalen continued, his voice dropping in volume but gaining in intensity. Initial scans indicated catastrophic failure. Subsequent X-rays show a fusion so instantaneous and complete it defies the conventional biological timeline. It is, Doctor, an act of divine intervention or something far older. He didn't ask her for an explanation. He demanded a confession. It was luck, Mr. Thorne, Lyra insisted, clinging to her rational shield. The bone slipped back into place during the movement. It was a highly improbable surgical fluke. Kalen's lips curved into a cold, terrifying semblance of a smile. I find fluke to be a flimsy foundation for a trauma unit, Doctor. Yet, you seem to possess it in abundance. I, however, prefer certainty. He straightened, a definitive gesture of ownership. His final words landed with the weight of ancient law, shattering the last fragments of her logical defense. The Thorne conglomerate does not purchase assets only to see them squandered in the shadows, Dr. Vance. Your touch, whatever its preternatural provenance, now belongs to the corporation. Do not attempt to repress it again. I require full, undiluted access to your peculiar talents. With that pronouncement, he executed a precise military turn and strode out of the room, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and the cold shock of undeniable truth. Lyra remained in her seat, the world she had built around sterile science reduced to ashes. Kalen Thorne was not a CEO, he was a king, and he had not only identified the feared power she had repressed for years, but he had given it a terrifying name. Bone Weaver. Her rational world was over. She was trapped in the cold, obsidian gaze of a predator who had finally located the single asset capable of either guaranteeing his reign or ending his life. Chapter 2. The Golden Scar, the Test. Lyra spent the remainder of the week operating under the cold shadow of King Kalen's gaze. The Thorne conglomerate takeover was proceeding with ruthless, silent efficiency. Hospital security was replaced by grim-faced men in dark suits who moved with unnatural coordination. Surveillance cameras seemed to multiply. St. Jude's had become a cage, and Lyra, the chief asset, was under constant, suffocating watch. She maintained the facade of the hyper-rational trauma surgeon, but inside, her scientific mind was in open war with the reality of the bone weaver. She spent hours in the hospital library, not reviewing surgical journals, but frantically searching for any historical, verifiable records of shifters, alphas, and the mythical weavers. The results were predictably folkloric, yet each tale of powerful, possessive kings and the enslaved human healers only sharpened her fear. Kalen Thorne knew her secret, and he was waiting for the perfect opportunity to confirm the extent of her power. The opportunity arrived 3 days later, not with a level 1 trauma alarm, but with a calculated, chilling quiet. Lyra was completing her rounds when the head of the new security detail, a shifter built like a brick column named Dax, appeared. Dr. Vance, the CEO is in exam room 3, minor injury. He requests your personal attention. Minor injury. The very phrase, delivered by a man who looked capable of shrugging off a gunshot wound, was a deliberate mockery. Lyra's pulse spiked. This was it. The second act of the corporate acquisition. The test. She grabbed a sterile kit and entered exam room 3. The room was empty save for Kalen Thorne, seated casually on the examination table. He was dressed in a simple, expensive black shirt, his obsidian eyes tracking her every movement. He held his left forearm out on the table. A thin, shallow cut, no more than 2 inches long, marred the pale skin just above his wrist. It was a cut so precise, so clean, It could only have been self-inflicted. It was medically trivial, yet the wound refused to clot, weeping a bead of dark, rich blood that possessed a faint, unnaturally metallic sheen. The air in the small room was thick with the residual scent of iron, the iron scent Lyra now recognized as the signature of shifter metabolism. A simple lapse in attention while reviewing documents, Kalen stated, his voice flat, his explanation a transparent insult to her intelligence. Lyra, however, instantly decoded the true nature of the injury. It was a shallow cut, yes, but it was designed to glisten unnaturally, to tempt her gift. The cut was not meant for healing. It was a frequency emitter, designed to draw out the resonant energy of the bone weaver. He doesn't need healing. He is mapping the frequency of my power. She masked her rising anxiety behind the impenetrable shield of her surgical professionalism. This is a ridiculous waste of my time, Mr. Thorne. Any intern can bandage this. But only you possess the touch I require, Kalen countered, the corner of his lip twitching with predatory amusement. The hospital is now under my ownership. I choose my healer. Please, proceed with the dressing, and be thorough. I abhor inefficiency. Lyra forced herself to move. She snapped on her gloves, the action precise and professional. As her cool, dispassionate fingers reached toward his exposed forearm, the volatile energy in the room intensified, flaring between them like two opposite magnetic poles suddenly forced into proximity. The closer she got, the stronger the thrumming became in her palms. It was the same golden heat, but amplified, screaming for release. Lyra could feel the molecules of his skin, the blood rushing beneath the shallow laceration. Her power didn't just want to heal the cut, it wanted to descend deeper, into the underlying tissue, into the bone itself, to confirm its capabilities on a king. Lyra fought it, pouring all her will into repression. She was a scientist. She would treat the visible, measurable injury. Nothing more. The wound is trivial, she stated, her voice steady despite the seismic battle raging inside her hands. She carefully cleaned the cut with antiseptic, the action slow, meticulous, and agonizingly human. Kalen watched her, his obsidian eyes never blinking, boring into her with an unnerving mixture of intensity and icy impatience. He was the anchor in the room, waiting for her to break, waiting for the golden flare that would confirm the prophecy and seal her fate. Lyra picked up the surgical tape and precisely, painstakingly, covered the cut with a standard sterile dressing. It was the most disciplined act of her career, a deliberate, professional rejection of the magical intervention his ancient blood craved. The moment her hands withdrew, Kalen's silent pressure snapped. "Disappointing," he murmured, the word carrying the sting of 1,000 years of shifter scorn. "You have been withholding resources from your proprietor, Doctor. A lack of corporate loyalty, I would say. A lack of respect for a direct command." "I performed standard medical procedure, Mr. Thorne," Lyra shot back, ripping off her gloves and tossing them into the biohazard bin. "My duty is to treat injury, not indulge in bizarre corporate fantasies about a magical touch. The wound is dressed. You are dismissed." Kalen did not rise. He simply held her gaze, his expression unreadable. His power a heavy blanket pressing down on her lungs. For a stretched, silent minute, the Alpha King assessed the human doctor who had defied him. Then, he moved. Kalen smoothly peeled the sterile dressing from his forearm, dismissing her medical intervention with a flick of his wrist. The cut was gone. There was no trace of the shallow laceration, no scar, no residual blood, only the flawless pale skin of an impossibly accelerated regeneration. Lyra knew instantly that his regeneration was not mere healing. It was a supernatural function he could control. He hadn't needed her at all. The entire exercise had been a probe. Kalen stood, towering over her. "The next time I require your personal attention, Doctor, the stakes will be significantly higher than a minor paper cut. And your resistance will be met with greater consequence. He was gone moments later, leaving the exam room heavy with the scent of ozone and iron. Lyra stood frozen, staring at the sterile countertop. Her palms were burning, not the faint thrum, but a definite, radiating golden heat. She stared at her hands, the heat a visible flush beneath her skin. Kalen Thorne had deliberately, magically, left a trace of his powerful essence upon her. It was a physical, searing mark, a subtle, inescapable sign of the Alpha's deliberate contact. It was the terrifying, unspoken claim of the Blood King on his bone weaver. Lyra realized the test was not about whether she would heal him, but whether her power registered his essence. It did. The golden scar on her hands was the chilling proof. She was bound by a volatile, molecular connection to the king who now owned her hospital and coveted her power. Chapter 3. The Blood Census. The Discovery. The phantom heat in Lyra's hands was an agonizing, constant reminder of Kalen Thorne's claim. The golden warmth was receding now, leaving behind a subtle, persistent chill that felt less like temperature and more like the absence of her own unique energy, a drain she recognized as the residue of his powerful, invasive mapping. Her scientific mind was screaming for a PET scan, an MRI, any verifiable data point to explain the impossible iron scent left on her skin, but the truth was no longer clinical. It was mythological. Lyra took emergency leave, citing an invented severe viral infection that conveniently required her to be unreachable. She retreated not to her sterile condo, but to the dust-choked catacombs of the city's oldest municipal archives, a place where the verifiable laws of man often collided with the forgotten laws of nature. She was no longer hunting for medical anomalies. She was hunting for her own defense. Hours bled into days amidst brittle paper and the suffocating scent of age. She bypassed the indexed history of the city, plunging instead into the obscure, uncatalogued records, regional folklore, early settlement diaries, and forgotten accounts of Native American tribes that had vanished before the arrival of the rail lines. Then she found it. Tucked within a 17th-century magistrate's journal detailing bizarre animal attacks and suspiciously fast-healing wounds on militiamen was the first mention. The text was in archaic script, riddled with superstitious embellishments, but the core terminology was chillingly consistent. It spoke of the skinwalkers, shifters, and their alphas, beings who commanded allegiance through brute force and supernatural dominance. More terrifyingly, it detailed a rare human lineage referred to as the Bone Weavers. Lyra read, her fingers trembling against the fragile paper, those gifted with the golden touch, who draw life from their own deep spirit to mend the flesh and set the frame. Their rarity maketh them prey, for no wound of the walker, save that of silver, can resist the weaver's art. And the great walker, the king, hath ever sought to bind the weaver in servitude, that his reign might be eternal, unthreatened by the inevitable decay of mortal flesh. The description was precise, horrifyingly accurate to the inexplicable power in her hands. She was not a unique anomaly. She was a predictable resource, a biological prize sought by a millennia-old bloodline of apex predators. Her touch, the thing she had labeled a fluke, was the very thing King Kalen had been hunting. Lyra's mind flashed back to the hospital, to the casual way the Thorne conglomerate had purchased St. Jude's, and to Kalen's strange focus on the staff's touch. He hadn't been taking a corporate census. He had been conducting a blood census of the local human population, screening for the telltale energy signature of the bone weaver, hiding his hunt behind a mountain of paperwork and financial clout. She realized the sheer scale of the deception. Kalen Thorne, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, the man who navigated boardrooms and global finance, was the sovereign ruler of a hidden, savage world. He was King Kalen, the head of the brutal Iron Fang pack, hiding his true nature in plain sight, using corporate anonymity as his camouflage. His site inspection was not to review quarterly earnings, but to verify the authenticity of his greatest asset. His minor injury was a clinical, surgical test of her power's frequency. A terrifying clarity settled over Lyra. She was not the victim of a random supernatural encounter. She was the inevitable target of a well-executed strategic capture plan. The Iron Fang pack, notorious for its aggression and isolationist philosophy, would stop at nothing to claim her. Lyra flipped the journal page, seeking some kind of defense, some loophole in the ancient law. She found a fragmented, chilling entry penned by the magistrate who had clearly succumbed to madness. They do not just heal. The legends say a weaver's most terrible power is to deny the gift, to turn the light inward and leave the walker to the slow, agonizing decay of a human wound, to make the immortal mortal. The king will fear this above all, for it is the only true end to his reign. Lyra looked at her hands, no longer seeing surgical instruments, but weapons. Her power was twofold: absolute repair or absolute negation of regeneration. She could mend a shattered bone, or she could render a shifter's legendary healing inert, turning a paper cut into a death sentence. Kalen Thorne knew she was a prize. He didn't know she was also his potential executioner. A sudden, sharp sound, the soft, controlled click of a heavy lock being disengaged, snapped Lyra out of her horrified study. The archives were supposed to be closed. She froze, every surgical instinct for survival taking over. She recognized the sound instantly. It was the careful, deliberate entry of a trained professional, the same precise, quiet footfalls she had noted on Kalen's security detail. A shadow fell over the aisle. "Dr. Vance, I see your viral infection required you to seek medical texts in the regional history section." The voice was low, resonant, and utterly devoid of surprise. Kalen Thorne stood at the end of the aisle. He was no longer in a suit, but in dark, heavy outdoor gear that spoke of quiet movement and lethal preparedness. His obsidian eyes, now fully illuminated by the weak archival light, held a deep, satisfied glint. "You should know, Doctor," Kalen purred, advancing slowly. "The bone weavers are often compelled to seek knowledge of their own lineage. It is a predictable flaw. And the most valuable assets are never left unguarded." He reached out, his hand moving with the blur of predatory speed, not to grab her, but to seize the ancient journal she was clutching. As his fingers closed around the book, their skin brushed. The golden heat flared on Lyra's palms one last time, instantly countered by the cold, dense iron scent of his power. "Now that you know what you are," Kalen whispered, pulling the book away, "we can begin the negotiation of your inevitable future." Chapter 4. The Unwanted Consort, the Bargain. The archival light seemed to dim, focusing entirely on the space between them. Kalen Thorne held the fragile, archaic journal with casual ownership, his obsidian eyes burning with a triumph that was chilling in its quiet certainty. "Predictable," he repeated, the word a soft indictment of her human nature. "You searched for an explanation, Dr. Vance. Instead, you found a contract." Lyra refused to yield ground. Her hands, still tingling with the phantom heat of their last contact, curled into fists inside her pockets. "I found folklore, Mr. Thorne, and a conspiracy. You bought a hospital, invaded my life, and are now citing 17th century superstition to justify a kidnapping." Kalen sighed, an act of performative patience that grated on her nerves. He tucked the ancient text under his arm. "Let's dispense with the melodrama, Doctor. You know what you did to the motorcycle victim was not folklore. You know what you felt in my exam room was not superstition. You possess the power of the bone weaver, the ability to override a shifter's greatest strength, our regeneration." He gestured around the dusty enclosed archive room. This is not a conspiracy, Lyra. This is shifter law. A power of your magnitude cannot exist unbound. It is a strategic weapon of mass destruction. Your existence, independent of a dominant pack, poses an existential threat to our secrecy and our survival. Survival or domination? She challenged, her voice low. You're King Kalen of the Iron Fang Pack. Your pack's entire history is built on dominance. Precisely, he conceded, the honesty chilling. Which is why we understand the necessity of control. Think, Doctor, with the logic you pride yourself on. What are the logical outcomes for an unbound weaver? He stepped closer, forcing her against the heavy shelving, his proximity an overwhelming, musky blend of ozone, iron, and expensive cologne. Outcome: A. Annihilation, he stated, his voice dropping to a gravelly, inescapable whisper. You are killed, cleanly and immediately, before a weaker, less ethical pack, perhaps the nomadic southern clans, can capture you. They would use your gift to torture, experiment, or turn their own into monstrous composites. Your death would be a messy, regrettable necessity, ensuring the stability of our borders. Lyra swallowed, the image of her power weaponized for cruelty, a cold dread in her gut. She believed him. She believed he was capable of carrying out that verdict without a second thought. Outcome B. Subjugation, he continued, his obsidian gaze piercing her defenses. You are taken by force. You are restrained. Your will broken through whatever means necessary, and your talent is extracted only when required, under duress. An inelegant, unpleasant, and inefficient process. I prefer my assets to be cooperative. And outcome C? Lyra asked, her breath catching as the only choice became terrifyingly clear. Kalen smiled, that devastating cold expression that promised destruction wrapped in velvet. Outcome C. The covenant of the consort. He extended his hand, not in a romantic gesture, but in the cold presentation of a contract. You agree to be bound to me. You agree to become the Alpha Consort, the Queen of the Null. Your power will be secured under my protection and reserved only for the Iron Fang Pack. In return, your life is spared. Your human needs are met with unparalleled luxury, and the full, formidable might of my lineage shields you from all external threats. The sheer audacity of the bargain was staggering. Marriage for survival, sovereignty for safety. You're offering me a gilded cage, Lyra said, the analysis automatic. I am offering you survival and utility within a power structure already designed to contain you, Kalen corrected, his voice a suffocating blanket of logic. You are an impossible variable, Lyra. I am offering you an equation that works. Under shifter law, the Bone Weaver must stand beside the king. Your presence legitimizes my power. My claim secures your life. He leaned in, his lips close to her ear, the warmth of his breath a sudden disorienting human touch amidst the supernatural terror. My reign is currently facing significant political and military challenges. I require the stability your power provides, Lyra. I need the assurance that no enemy can deny my strength. I need a queen whose hand can heal me one moment and nullify my foe the next. I need the balance only a weaver can provide. Lyra finally understood the cynicism of the proposition. He wasn't interested in her heart or her mind. He was interested in her function. She would be his ultimate political shield, his biological failsafe. He was offering her a title, Queen of the Null, as a cover for a lifetime of servitude, a gilded cage over a bloody grave. She met his gaze, the surgeon replacing the stunned woman. And what if I refuse? What if I choose to stand alone? Kalen's eyes hardened, the flecks of gold in the obsidian extinguishing to pure, merciless black. That is not a choice, Doctor. That is a judgment. Outcome A, delivered immediately. My pack is outside, securing the perimeter of this archive. Your viral infection will unfortunately turn fatal tonight, and the most dangerous weapon in existence will be safely neutralized." He gave her a final, decisive look, emphasizing the weight of the moment. "You are a rationalist, Lyra. Choose the logical outcome. Choose the contract that allows you to survive and potentially subvert from within. Choose your king." He extended his hand again, and this time, Lyra saw not the CEO, not the predator, but the Blood King. The pressure of his ultimatum was absolute, suffocating her last gasp of free will. Her life, her terrifying power, and her future were balanced on the razor edge of his extended palm. Lyra, the dedicated physician of the verifiable, had only one choice left: to enter the realm of the impossible and fight her way back to freedom from the inside. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and placed her hot, gold-tinged hand into his cold, firm grasp. The contact was an electric shock, a binding oath that reverberated through the archive. "I choose the logical outcome, King Kalen," Lyra said, her voice steady, despite the silent scream of surrender in her mind. "I accept the covenant of the consort." Chapter 5. The Glass Fortress, the Hostage. The transition from the dusty archive to the opulent reality of her captivity was immediate and brutal. Lyra's acceptance of the covenant was not sealed with a kiss, but with the cold, crushing finality of a predator securing its prey. Kalen Thorne's grip remained firm on her hand as they exited the archives, but the moment they reached his waiting armored sedan, he released her as if she were a piece of equipment now secured, no longer requiring a personal touch. The drive was silent, dominated by the rhythmic purr of the high-performance engine and the unblinking, unsettling presence of Dax, Kalen's silent security chief, in the driver's seat. Lyra watched the familiar cityscape melt away, replaced by miles of private, guarded forest land. She was being taken deep into the Iron Fang territory, a move designed to sever her entirely from her human existence. She asked one question, her voice tightly controlled. "My home, my belongings, my job." Kalen didn't turn his head. "Your previous residence has been secured and inventoried. Your professional obligations at St. Jude's are now my obligations. Consider yourself on an indefinite sabbatical. The Thorne conglomerate handles all necessary personnel dissolution. Your disappearance will be seamless. The scientific world will simply believe Dr. Vance accepted a massive, private research grant requiring total isolation." Seamless. The casual ruthlessness was chilling. He didn't erase her life. He simply paved over it. Finally, the landscape opened up to reveal the seat of his power, the Thorne estate. It was not the moss-covered Gothic mansion of fairy tales, but a monument to contemporary dominance. The structure was a severe, architecturally precise fortress of steel, polished concrete, and seamless glass. It was a perfect blend of high-end luxury and military-grade security, a habitat designed less for family life and more for surveillance. It did not invite, it dominated. The entire facade felt like a massive one-way mirror, allowing Kalen and his pack to observe the outside world while maintaining their impenetrable secrecy. Inside, the ambiance was one of cold, rarefied air. High ceilings and minimalist design created a perpetual echo, amplifying the precise, heavy footfalls of the Iron Fang pack. These were not the docile, human-passing guards from the hospital. These were shifters in their natural environment, radiating a dense, animalistic energy that made the hair on Lyra's arms stand up. Kalen led her through halls that felt more like corridors of power than a home, pausing only once. "Lyra Vance, this is Vera," Kalen stated, his voice professional, the king presenting his new prize. Vera was Kalen's formidable female beta. She was tall, built with the lean, tensile strength of a predator, and dressed in sharp, utilitarian leather. Her hair was pulled back tightly, emphasizing the clean, merciless lines of her face. But it was her eyes. a startling, liquid amber that fixed on Lyra with unvarnished contempt. Vera didn't offer a hand, a greeting, or even a courtesy nod. Her assessment was a slow, contemptuous sweep from Lyra's practical slacks to her exhausted face. "The human asset," Vera finally drawled, the emphasis on the last word stripping Lyra of all dignity. Her voice was husky, edged with territorial resentment. "She is the consort, Vera. Treat her with the respect due to my claim," Kalen commanded, his tone sharp, though Lyra suspected his defense was rooted entirely in protecting his investment, not her person. Vera inclined her head in a mockery of deference, her gaze returning to Lyra. "The pack will require proof of her utility, King Kalen. Until then, she is merely a weakness we must guard." The message was brutally clear. Lyra was viewed by the elite of the Iron Fang pack as a necessary evil, a tool that had displaced a potential shifter mate. Kalen ignored the subtle challenge, grasping Lyra's arm just above the elbow, a non-negotiable directive, and ushering her toward the east wing. The consort's suite was predictably lavish, sprawling minimalist decor, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the manicured grounds, and a massive bed that looked more like a slab of marble than a place of comfort. Kalen walked through the rooms, pointing out amenities with clinical detachment. "You will have full staff, resources, and access to a private climate-controlled bio-research lab for your personal studies." He then moved to the main door, his eyes cold. "Your movements, however, will be restricted until the Covenant is formally recognized by the Council and the Pack," he stated, his obsidian gaze drilling into her. "The windows are triple-paned, reinforced glass. The perimeter of the estate is secured by a low-frequency sonic field, easily monitored by Dax and Vera." He paused, then delivered the final crushing piece of information. "And the lock on your door is not to keep others out, Lyra. It is to keep you in. Consider this a necessary step of political confinement. You are not a guest, nor are you a bride-to-be. You are a hostage of immense strategic value, and your compliance is paramount to my political stability." He had used the word hostage with the brutal honesty of a king who understood the language of power better than the language of human feeling. Lyra understood then that the beautiful, expansive suite was nothing more than a highly secured, gilded cell. Her sole value lay in her power to heal or to nullify, a volatile secret that made her the most important and most guarded prisoner in the Iron Fang domain. Kalen activated a discreet panel beside the door. A soft, authoritative click echoed in the vast room. The lock was thrown. "I will return to discuss the specifics of the prophecy after I have addressed the council," Kalen informed her. "Understand this, Lyra. Your defiance will only lead to greater confinement. Your survival depends on your utility. Do not attempt to test my security." He left her then, the sound of the double-locked door a resounding sentence. Lyra walked to the triple-paned window, placing her hand against the cold glass. Out beyond the perfect lawns, the forest looked dark and unforgiving. She wasn't just isolated from the world, she was trapped inside a cold, hyper-efficient machine of power. She wasn't Dr. Lyra Vance, surgeon. She was the bone weaver, the unwanted consort, and the newest, most dangerous asset in the Blood King's arsenal. Her sole task now was to find the flaw in the flawless glass fortress. Chapter 6. The Prophecy's Cage. The Lie. The confines of the consort's suite quickly began to feel less like luxury and more like a mausoleum. Lyra spent the next day dissecting her environment, not as a prisoner, but as a hostage engineer. The reinforced glass was proof against brute force. The sonic field was a perimeter alarm. Her prison was meticulously designed, proving Kalen considered her escape a near-certain attempt. That evening, the heavy metallic click of the door signaled Kalen's return. He was no longer in his dark field gear, but in a custom silk shirt that spoke of casual, dangerous wealth. He carried a single glass of amber liquid, but offered her nothing, a subtle, calculated move to emphasize their unequal status. You survived the first 24 hours without attempting a breach. Remarkable restraint for a human who believes in free will, Kalen observed, taking a slow sip. He settled onto a chaise lounge, treating the lavish room like a war room. Lyra, who had been standing at the reinforced window, turned. I am a rationalist, King Kalen. I assess threats and calculate risk. I have no data on your security and no weapon. I chose observation over suicide. Excellent, he replied, his obsidian eyes glinting with approval. Then we can proceed to the necessary formality, the prophecy of the null. He set his drink down. The air instantly crackled with seriousness, the veneer of corporate CEO entirely stripped away. This was the Blood King, speaking the ancient language of his dominance. The Iron Fang pack did not rise to power through simple brute strength, Lyra. We rose through strategic alignment with ancient law. Our strength is absolute, but historically, every shifter reign faces a single, inevitable vulnerability, the threat of genetic decay or a rival alpha's successful challenge. He moved to stand over her, the proximity crushing. The prophecy states that for the Thorn lineage to hold eternal, undisputed dominion over the territories, the reigning king must secure a bone weaver. This weaver is not merely a healer. She is the null point, the only variable capable of negating a shifter's regeneration. I read that part in the archives, Lyra stated, her voice tight. The king binds the weaver to ensure his survival. You only read the folklore, Kalen corrected with chilling intimacy, his gaze locking with hers. You missed the crucial condition. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a seductive, venomous whisper. The prophecy stipulates that the weaver must willingly accept her place at the king's side, recognizing his authority as rightful and absolute. Lyra felt a cold shock travel through her spine. This was the true core of her confinement, the reason she wasn't simply locked in a dungeon. You need my submission, she realized, the truth a bitter taste in her mouth. Not just my presence. The magic won't activate properly, or the pack won't honor the legitimacy of the bond unless I comply with the ancient condition. You need to engineer my consent. Kalen's smile was a masterpiece of cold, self-serving logic. Precisely, Doctor. Your compliance cannot be faked with mere force. It must be manufactured through necessity, logic, and the careful application of leverage. You are a tool, Lyra, whose compliance is required to satisfy a millennia-old condition. You are the final piece of the Iron Fang machine. He watched her, waiting for the inevitable human reaction, the anger, the defiance, the tears. Lyra met his gaze with the unwavering clinical assessment of a surgeon observing a fascinatingly malignant tumor. So my function is to be the prophecy's cage? You have already secured my person. Now you must break my will to secure my power. The choice is yours, Kalen said smoothly, retreating slightly. You can fight the condition and risk my wrath, which I assure you you do not want to test. Or you can pragmatically accept the role of queen and consort, enjoying the immense power and security that title provides. The latter is far more logical, Doctor. I am not asking for your love. I am demanding your utility. He picked up his glass again, his obsidian eyes holding a dangerous satisfaction. Weavers are known to be stubbornly resistant to the inevitable. But I am King Kalen. I always achieve the logical outcome. Prepare yourself, Lyra. The manufacturing process of your submission has just begun. He finished his drink, the sound of the glass clinking on the table marking the end of the lesson. He was gone moments later, leaving Lyra alone in the sterile silence of her cage, staring at the panoramic view of the dark forest. She was a tool, and the Blood King intended to break, reshape, and wield her power for the eternal dominance of his pack. Chapter 7. The Cost of Control. The refusal. The manufacturing of Lyra's submission began immediately. Kaelin employed a strategy of psychological warfare, isolating her, dominating her physical space, and subtly showcasing the consequences of defiance within his domain. He brought her to the inner training grounds, a harsh, expansive pit carved into the heart of the estate, designed for controlled violence and the forging of pack loyalty. Lyra was placed on a raised platform, a privileged observer forced to watch the brutal education of the Iron Fang pack. It was a calculated move to demonstrate the raw, terrifying power she was now tethered to, and to emphasize that Kaelin's authority was absolute, maintained through pain and fear. The air was thick with the scent of pine, wet earth, and the metallic tang of fresh shifter blood. The training was merciless. Lyra, the trauma surgeon, watched the controlled breaking of limbs, the strategic tearing of muscle, and the subsequent rapid self-mending. She was witnessing the biological wonder of shifter regeneration, which Kaelin viewed not as a gift, but as a mandatory, functional resilience. Kaelin himself was the primary instructor, his presence on the field a dark vortex of power. He moved with a speed that blurred the line between man and beast, his voice a series of guttural commands. The brutality escalated when a young, ambitious subordinate, a beta named Ren, faltered in a complicated sparring maneuver, openly questioning Kaelin's strategic decision. The Alpha King paused, the training floor falling into an immediate deathly silence. Ren was breathing hard, defiant pride visible in his stance. Kaelin walked toward him slowly. The Iron Fang pack does not permit debate in the field, Beta. It permits obedience. Ren stood firm. It was inefficient, King Kaelin. Your approach would lead to unnecessary casualties. The response was instantaneous and horrific. There was no warning snarl, no shifter transformation, just a sudden, impossibly swift blur of human motion. Kaelin landed a single, devastating kick that struck Ren's knee with the calculated force of a hydraulic press. A sickening crack echoed across the silent training pit. Ren collapsed, a choked scream dying in his throat as the pain, pure, non-regenerative pain, locked him down. The leg lay at a grotesque, impossible angle. Kaelin hadn't just broken the bone, he had engineered a complex, unstable fracture designed to maximize agony and prevent immediate self-healing without serious effort. The king stood over the screaming Beta, his obsidian eyes cold, his fury controlled but immense. He was demonstrating the consequence of disloyalty. Then Kaelin looked up at Lyra. He smiled, a cold, deliberate pull of muscle, and delivered the final, calculated step of his cruelty. He grabbed the injured Beta by the scruff of his jacket and dragged the broken, convulsing subordinate across the rough ground, right to the foot of Lyra's platform. The Alpha King was presenting the offering. "Observe your king's governance." "Consort," Kaelin commanded, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. He then fixed Lyra with a gaze that was both a demand and a challenge. "Now, heal him." The request was a direct test of her submission, designed to shatter her remaining moral autonomy and prove her utility to the pack. The golden heat flared instantly in Lyra's hands, responding to the proximity of catastrophic injury. The Weaver instinct screamed at her to repair, to mitigate the agony, to fulfill the surgeon's oath she had sworn in her old life. Lyra descended the platform stairs slowly, her eyes locked on Kaelin's. She reached the injured Beta, who was struggling against the pain, his eyes wide with fear and shame. She looked at the shattered limb, a trauma that demanded immediate intervention. But then, she looked at King Kaelin. His face held a look of predatory expectation. He needed this. He needed her to submit to his brutality, to use her sacred gift to clean up his political mess, thereby becoming his accomplice. He needed her to prove to the entire Iron Fang pack that her power was chained to his command. Lyra, the surgeon who believed in logic, made a decision based on morality. She saw the Alpha's challenge, and for the first time since her capture, she chose defiance. She knelt beside the screaming Beta, her hands hovering inches above the mangled knee, close enough to feel the chaotic energy of the fracture, close enough for Kaelin to see the gold flickering under her skin. Then, slowly, deliberately, Lyra retracted her hands. She looked King Kaelin dead in the eye, her gaze clear and unwavering. "I am a surgeon," she said, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "I swore an oath to do no harm. I will not use my gift to validate your political violence." She rose to her feet. "I am not your cleanup crew, King Kaelin. You broke him. You fix him." The silence that followed was a physical entity, heavy enough to crush bone. The entire Iron Fang pack was frozen, every shifter's focus shifting from the injured Beta to the defiance of the human consort. Kaelin Thorne's control fractured. His jaw tightened, the veins in his neck standing out like steel cables. His obsidian eyes flared with a deep internal light, not gold, but a cold, molten red. The air pressure dropped again, heavier this time, carrying the scent of volcanic rage. His voice, when it came, was a guttural snarl that stripped away all pretense of the CEO. "You defy a direct command. You deny your purpose. You test my patience, Weaver." "You test my morality, King," Lyra countered, though her body was screaming for her to run. "My utility is not subservience, it is healing, and I will not use it to sanitize your brutality." Kaelin took one slow, deliberate step toward her. The raw, terrifying fury radiating off him was a tangible, overwhelming thing. It felt like standing directly in the path of a roaring physical wind. "You have chosen to witness the true cost of my control, consort," Kaelin grated out. He shoved Lyra aside with a violent, possessive movement that didn't hurt her, but put her back on the viewing platform. He turned his focus back to the agonizing Beta, kneeling beside him. Instead of healing, Kaelin simply stared down at the subordinate, forcing the shifter to endure the consequence of his disobedience. "Let him suffer," Kaelin commanded the waiting shifters. "He will mend slowly, painfully, under the eye of the human consort he failed to respect. Let this be your lesson, Lyra. Your refusal only extends the agony." The lesson was delivered. Lyra watched as the broken Beta was hauled away, his cries mingling with the terrifying realization that her moral stand had resulted only in prolonged suffering. She had asserted her autonomy, but in the Iron Fang pack, defiance was a luxurious, expensive commodity. She had refused to be the tool, but Kaelin had instantly found a way to make her the witness to his continued cruelty. Chapter 8. The Price of Healing, the Breach. The tension following Lyra's refusal, the great, gaping hole in Kaelin's control, was a volatile element hanging over the glass fortress. Kaelin had retreated into cold, calculating silence, tightening his security, but avoiding direct confrontation with Lyra, allowing her to marinate in the guilt of the Beta's suffering. He was waiting for her resolve to crumble, for her surgeon's instinct to override her human morality. He didn't have to wait long. The breach came at the cusp of dawn, announced not by an alarm siren, but by a sudden seismic shockwave that rattled the reinforced glass of Lyra's suite and plunged the fortress into an unnerving half-light. The air was instantly thick with the scent of burning ozone and strange, unfamiliar blood, the distinct metallic tang of a rival pack. "Intrusion! Perimeter breach! Sector Gamma!" the electronic command system screamed, its automated voice thin against the backdrop of distant snarls and the heavy thud of shifter bodies colliding. Lyra, propelled by adrenaline, rushed to the window. Outside, the Iron Fang security team was locked in vicious, desperate combat with intruders, sleeker, faster shifters whose pelts ranged from silver gray to pure white. These were not random attackers. This was a coordinated tactical strike by the Crescent Pack, a humanitarian faction notorious for valuing stealth and strategy over the Iron Fang's brutal dominance. They weren't here for territory. They were here for a target. Kalen's fortress, designed to withstand siege, was momentarily crippled. The chaos provided the opportunity Lyra had been subconsciously waiting for. Her door, designed to lock her in, was now a potential escape route for her to choose. She tried the handle, locked. Then a sudden, blinding flash of energy, a localized EMP that fried a nearby generator, coincided with a high-pitched metallic shriek from the lock mechanism. The door handle clicked. The electric mechanism was momentarily neutralized. Lyra yanked the door open and plunged into the darkened corridor. She didn't head for the perimeter. She followed the sounds of the most concentrated fighting, driven by the ingrained, terrifying reflex of a trauma surgeon to locate the highest concentration of injury. She found herself in a service tunnel near the conservatory, where a vicious skirmish had just ended. The silence was broken only by ragged breathing and the painful shifting of injured bodies. Lyra saw a cluster of Iron Fang warriors standing guard over a small, slumped figure near the ventilation shaft. It wasn't a warrior. It was a pup, a crescent child, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, too young to be in combat, clearly intended as a distraction or a sacrificial lamb. The child was whimpering, clutching its leg. The familiar, sickeningly unstable angle of a catastrophic tibial fracture was visible even in the dim light. The pup was bleeding, terrified, and far from the crescent lines. Lyra saw its face, the innocent, raw pain, and her carefully maintained moral separation collapsed. This wasn't a political entity. This was a patient. This was a child whose life she was sworn to protect. Her surgical oath, the foundation of her entire life, surged forward, overriding the terror of Kalen's authority. She moved with reckless speed, slipping past the distracted Iron Fang guards who were more focused on the external threat. Lyra dropped to her knees beside the child before anyone could react. The golden energy in her hands surged, uncontrolled, demanding release. The pup flinched, but Lyra didn't hesitate. She cupped the shattered limb, and with a force that felt like pure, focused will, she began to weave the bone. The feeling was intense, a rapid, powerful consumption of her own life force, converting it into cellular repair. In less than 20 seconds, the bone slammed into alignment, the tear in the flesh closed, the weeping blood stanched. The pup's leg was whole, functional, and already beginning the rapid external recovery unique to shifter kind. "Run!" Lyra whispered fiercely, releasing the child. The pup scrambled up, looking at her with wide, grateful, gold-flecked eyes, then darted toward an open service hatch that led toward the perimeter. Lyra rose just as the iron-scented air returned to normal, and the emergency lights flickered back on. Standing 10 yards away, having materialized in the silence, was King Kalen. He was not yet fully transformed, but his clothing was strained across his shoulders, and the cold, molten red was burning bright in his obsidian eyes. He had clearly just finished neutralizing a major threat, his power radiating off him like heat from slag. He had not seen her approach the child, but he had seen the immediate aftermath. He had seen the golden residual heat fading from her hands. He had seen the healed pup scramble away, a single decisive breach in the security of his fortress. Kalen didn't rage. He didn't snarl. His face went utterly still, a mask of terrifying clarity. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stripping away the last illusion of their arrangement. He didn't just understand that her power had been used. He understood the profound implication of her action. Lyra's loyalty was not bound by the covenant, the prophecy, or even the immediate threat of his brutality. It was bound only to her human oath to heal. He had tried to force her to heal his enemies, the disloyal Beta, to prove his control. Instead, She had chosen to heal his rivals, the Crescent Pup, to prove her autonomy. "You have chosen a side, Weaver." Kalen's voice was dangerously quiet, resonating with a deep, contained fury. "You have interfered with my war." Lyra stood her ground, the exhaustion of the massive magical output making her light-headed, but her resolve ironclad. "I chose no side, King Kalen. I chose the patient. My power is not your weapon. It is my duty." The king took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The air around him shimmered with suppressed power. The true price of her defiance, the price of healing, was about to be levied. "You have mistaken your duty for control, Lyra," Kalen grated out, his hands clenching into fists. "And now you will learn that in the Iron Fang Pack, acts of autonomous healing are treated as acts of treason." Chapter 9. The Null Point, the True Power. The aftermath of the Crescent Pack breach was swift and unforgiving. Lyra was dragged from the service tunnels and confined once more to the consort's suite, the locks now supplemented by a physical guard detail of 2 heavily muscled shifters posted 24 hours a day. Kalen's fury was a cold, constant pressure, but he avoided direct contact, knowing that their next confrontation would be definitive. He was clearly recalibrating his strategy, viewing his prize less as a tool and more as a biological weapon with an alarming capacity for independent thought. Lyra, for her part, was exhausted but strangely exhilarated. She had chosen defiance and survived. Now, she had a new, desperate necessity: to understand the true upper limit of the power Kalen so fiercely coveted. Over the next 2 days, confined to the elaborate cage, Lyra began her secret experiments. Her subjects were not human or shifter, but small, easily obtainable specimens from the elaborate gardens, a collection of hardy, invasive ivy and thorny climbing roses Kalen had allowed her to keep in the suite. She focused her power, directing the golden heat not to mend, but to manipulate. She touched a torn ivy leaf, concentrating the energy on the cellular structure. Instead of instantly fusing the tear, she found she could momentarily halt the natural growth. Then, she tried a rose stem she had deliberately snapped. She commanded the healing energy to stop. For several agonizing seconds, the break remained, brown and withered, entirely inert. The realization hit her with the force of a level Y trauma impact. Her power didn't just heal at an accelerated rate. It controlled the very mechanism of regeneration. The Bone Weaver's gift was not acceleration, but cellular command. Lyra moved to the true test, a test only possible because she was constantly surrounded by the dense, raw energy of the Iron Fang shifters, a natural frequency she could now tune into. She focused on the metallic scent of iron scent permeating the environment, the signature of shifter metabolism. She held her hands out, concentrating the golden energy, now directed purely by intellect, not instinct. She imagined her power as a wave, matching the frequency of the shifter energy, then deliberately flipping the phase. A sudden sharp headache lanced through her skull, and the golden glow in her palms turned to a sterile, unnerving silver white. She felt a localized void, a small, silent, perfect space where the shifter energy was instantly, chemically neutralized. Lyra's breath caught. The archives had called it the null point. Her gift's true, terrifying nature was revealed. Her power could momentarily, surgically deactivate a shifter's regenerative ability. If she could maintain that targeted focus for even a second, a small, superficial wound on a shifter would not heal. It would fester. A broken limb would not knit back instantly. It would require weeks of excruciating human recovery. And King Kalen, a single focused touch, sustained for just moments, could render his formidable millennia-old shifter physiology utterly mortal. His legendary strength and speed would remain, but his defining trait, his immortality against conventional injury, would vanish. A gunshot would kill him. A clean stab to the heart would end his reign. Lyra sat back on the cold marble floor, looking down at her surgeon's hands with an entirely new, terrifying reverence. She was not a prize to be protected from his enemies. She was a nuclear deterrent to be controlled. She was the key to his eternal dominance, and simultaneously, the sole, definitive key to his total destruction. She is not a queen. She is the ultimate failsafe. The thought gave her a cold, terrifying clarity. Kalen's obsession with securing her submission suddenly made perfect, lethal sense. He wasn't guarding an asset. He was neutralizing the single greatest threat to his existence, ensuring the one person capable of ending him remained firmly in his gilded cage. He needed her to willingly agree to the covenant, because any use of her power against his will could be weaponized. The door clicked open, and the towering silhouette of Vara, the ruthless beta, filled the frame. Her amber eyes swept the room, instantly sensing the volatile shift in Lyra's energy. "The king requires your presence, consort," Vara stated, her voice heavy with suspicion. She moved closer, her nose twitching, scenting the air. "You smell volatile. You've been using the touch." Lyra rose, meeting the beta's suspicious glare with a newfound icy composure. She no longer feared the Iron Fang hierarchy. She was the one holding the kill switch. "Tell your king," Lyra said, her voice now calm, authoritative, "that I understand the terms of his proposition now. I am ready to negotiate." Vara paused, thrown by the sudden radical change in Lyra's demeanor. She saw not the trembling prisoner, but a rival whose strategic value had just skyrocketed. The beta knew, with a primal, instinctual certainty, that the human had just discovered the true extent of her power. The power that made her the most valuable asset and the most dangerous individual in the whole of shifter kind. Lyra Vance was no longer just a doctor, she was the living definition of the null point. Chapter 10. The Queen's Vow, the True Rival. Vara led Lyra to Kalen, her suspicions palpable. The king, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, waited in his private study, a minimalist room dominated by a holographic display showing the Iron Fang territories, currently riddled with red tactical markers indicating increased Crescent Pack activity. Kalen dismissed Vara with a sharp gesture, his obsidian eyes focusing solely on Lyra. "You have changed, Weaver. Your fear has been replaced by a disconcerting composure. What did you discover in your isolation?" "I discovered the true nature of my utility, King Kalen," Lyra replied, meeting his gaze evenly. "And I have decided that my power is far too volatile for an unstable, one-sided bargain." Before Kalen could reply, a distraction occurred, not a physical breach, but a subtle electronic one. The holographic display glitched, the tactical map briefly overridden by a static-laced image, a complex, stylized sigil of a crescent moon bisected by a single sharp thorn. It was the mark of the rival pack. Then, a text message, an encrypted burst sent directly to Kalen's private terminal, flashed across the screen. Kalen snarled, moving instantly to neutralize the digital intrusion, but Lyra, with her surgeon's laser focus, had already captured the words. The message wasn't for Kalen. It was for her, a targeted cryptic transmission that had bypassed the Iron Fang security solely to reach the Bone Weaver. "The Covenant is a lie. The Blood King's crown is borrowed. Seek the matriarch's truth. T." Kalen managed to purge the message seconds later, but the damage was done. He looked up, his face a mask of cold fury, knowing his rival had contacted her. "What did you see?" he demanded, stepping toward her. "A breach in your security, King Kalen," Lyra said, refusing to acknowledge the content. "It was the Alpha of the Crescent Pack, Torvin," Kalen hissed, his power radiating off him in waves of possessive dominance. "He attempts to destabilize my claim. He seeks to weaponize your human sentiment." And what claim does he have on me? Lyra challenged, planting her feet. Kaelin paused, considering his answer. Torvin preaches a lie of peace and balance. He attempts to manipulate you with a counter-prophecy. He will tell you that the prophecy of the Null was twisted by my ancestors, the usurpers, to justify the capture of your kind. He took a step closer, forcing her to look up at him. He will tell you that the true intention of the Weaver's gift was not to secure a king's war, but to foster the growth of the Crescent Pack. He will claim you are the rightful matriarch of the Crescent lineage, destined to lead them into an age of harmony. He was laying out Torvin's entire counter-argument, calculating that his brutal honesty would outweigh the rival's idealistic lies. Lyra absorbed the revelation. Matriarch. The title changed everything. She wasn't just a political pawn, she was the central figure in a shifter civil war. Kaelin needed her power for dominance and eternal conquest. Torvin needed her power for legitimacy and political balance. So I am the center of a blood-soaked political war, not a love triangle, Lyra summarized, her voice cool and clinical. Two kings demanding my allegiance, one using fear, the other using false hope. Kaelin's expression hardened into a mask of pure possessiveness. There is no choice, Lyra. My claim is secured. My fortress is impenetrable. Torvin's humanitarian pack is weak, fractured, and survives only by my tolerance. If you choose his lie, I will drag you back, and the consequences for his pack will be absolute annihilation. But if the prophecy was twisted, Lyra argued, focusing on the structural weakness of his claim, then your entire lineage is built on a lie. You require my willing acceptance, but that willingness is contingent on your legitimacy. If Torvin holds the truth, then your claim is void. Kaelin's lips curled back in a cold snarl. Truth is defined by the one who holds the power, Weaver. And right now I hold the power, the castle, and the lock on your door. Torvin offers you a gentle leash. I offer you a crown of iron. Choose the king who is capable of keeping you alive. Lyra looked at the holographic map, the red markers of Iron Fang dominance juxtaposed with the subtle flicker of the crescent sigil. She had discovered the null point within herself. She knew she possessed the ability to end a shifter's life with a touch. She was no longer a victim seeking rescue. She was a weapon evaluating its best deployment strategy. I accept neither the gentle leash nor the crown of iron, King Kaelin, Lyra declared, her voice ringing with newfound authority. I accept the truth, and I take a queen's vow to end this war on the terms of the Weaver, not the terms of the king. Kaelin stared at her, a muscle twitching near his jaw. She had acknowledged the war. She had accepted a role of power, but she had refused both of their claims. You have chosen defiance over survival, Kaelin grated, stepping back, his hand moving to a hidden device. I will not permit this. The binding ritual is moved up. Now. He moved to seize her, but Lyra was faster. She had only one move left, to strike at his structural security. She lashed out with her hand, deliberately missing Kaelin, but slamming her palm against a hidden control panel on the wall. The golden energy, channeled through the null point silver, instantly overloaded the sensitive electronics. The doors to the study slammed shut and then jammed, sealing Kaelin and Lyra inside the tactical command center, just as the holographic map of the Iron Fang territories exploded in a chaotic cascade of conflicting data. Lyra had isolated the king, severing his instantaneous command over his pack and forcing the confrontation onto her own terms. Chapter 11. The Broken Crown, the Sacrificial Weave. Lyra's act of tactical sabotage, jamming the command center and isolating Kaelin, was a statement, not an escape plan. It bought her minutes, a valuable commodity she used to confront the furious Blood King. Kaelin's rage was a contained, terrifying storm. He didn't waste time on threats. He simply stared at the jammed door, then back at Lyra, realizing she was no longer merely a prisoner. She was a volatile chess piece capable of strategic moves. "The binding ceremony is no longer a negotiation, Weaver," Kalen stated, his voice dangerously low. "It is an immediate necessity. You have proven you cannot be trusted with autonomy. You will be bound, and your power will be my leash." Using a strength that belied his human form, Kalen ripped the jammed doors from their tracks, the sound a deafening scream of metal. The damage sent a new, higher-level alert through the fortress. King Kalen is moving. The binding ceremony was set for midnight in the fortress's deepest chamber, a stone-lined space called the Crypt of Covenants. Lyra was stripped of her own clothes and dressed in heavy, pristine white robes, a ritualistic purification that felt like preparation for sacrifice. Vara, the merciless Beta, oversaw the entire process, her amber eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "You should have chosen to obey the king, human," Vara hissed, adjusting the heavy silver collar placed around Lyra's neck. "Now your defiance will be melted into his dominance." Lyra ignored her, focusing entirely on the ritualistic space. The crypt was ancient, cold, and infused with the dense, dark energy of centuries of Iron Fang rule. In the center lay a raised stone altar carved with symbols of dominance and eternal allegiance. This was where the binding would take place, a dark rite meant to fuse her human life force, the null point, with Kalen's raw, ancient pack magic. The ceremony began. Kalen entered, clad in simple black leather, his eyes burning with focused intent. The Iron Fang Council, a collection of aged, formidable shifters, watched from the perimeter, silent judges of the king's claim. Kalen ascended the altar steps. He reached for Lyra's hand, his touch cold and possessive, pulling her to stand beside him. "We convene to witness the covenant of the Null," Kalen proclaimed, his voice echoing with authority. "This human, Lyra Vance, possesses the power of the Weaver, which shall be eternally bound to the will and prosperity of the Iron Fang Pack. She accepts the crown of the consort, and she pledges her life force to the dominion of the king." As he recited the ancient vows of ownership, Lyra felt the energy of the room press in on her, a physical manifestation of the pack's dominance. She was losing herself, her individual will dissolving into the overwhelming force of the ancient magic. Kalen drew a ceremonial dagger, its blade of dull silver, the only metal that truly wounds a shifter. He held the blade, not over her, but over his own chest, prepared to pierce the skin over his scar of dominion. This was the key, to mix their blood over the site of his deepest link to the pack's dark magic, sealing the bond forever. With this incision, the Weaver shall be bound, and the Iron Fang reign made eternal. As Kalen raised the dagger, Lyra saw the spot, a faint yet visible scar just over his heart, the site of his own alpha binding from decades past. It was the nerve center of his magic, the true anchor of his power. This was her moment, the point of no return. Instead of screaming or resisting the bonds, Lyra made a conscious, terrifying choice. She let the golden energy flood her hand, but instead of the warm, healing frequency, she flipped the switch, commanding the energy to the sterile, silver-white frequency of the null point. When Kalen's hand, holding the dagger, brushed her own, Lyra moved. She didn't stab him. She slammed her palm against his chest, directly over the ancient binding scar. The energy that erupted was not the gentle flow of healing. It was a violent surgical shockwave of pure cellular negation. Lyra drove the silver-white energy deep, not to kill, but to sever the ancient mystical bond. She concentrated the Weaver's power on the deepest link between Kalen and the pack's dark lineage, the scar of dominion. The crypt exploded with a guttural, inhuman roar of pure agony. Kalen screamed, an animalistic sound that shattered the solemnity of the rite. His obsidian eyes flared, not with rage, but with excruciating raw pain. His body spasmed violently, the ceremonial dagger clattering to the stone. He staggered back, grasping his chest. The ancient magic that anchored him to his pack, the deep generational flow of alpha strength and territorial dominance, was violently ripped away. Kalen didn't die. Lyra's choice had been surgical. But the Alpha King instantly dropped to his knees, his muscles twitching, his formidable power draining away like blood from a massive wound. The shock was absolute. His shifter strength was temporarily shattered. He was, for the first time in centuries, a physically vulnerable king. The Iron Fang Council erupted in chaos, their shouts echoing the massive breach in their dominance. "The king's strength has failed! The Weaver has broken the bond!" Lyra stood over the convulsing king, her white robes stark against the dark stone, the silver collar a terrifying symbol of her power's capability. Her move had cost her a catastrophic amount of life force. She was dizzy, swaying, her hands smoking with residual silver heat, but the crown was broken. She looked at the terrified faces of the council and the paralyzed horror on Vara's face. The Bone Weaver had not submitted. She had launched a surgical coup. Lyra Vance had just declared war on the Iron Fang Pack. Chapter 12. The Reign of the Weaver, the Escape. The aftermath of the sacrificial weave was pandemonium. King Kalen lay broken, not dead, but screaming. The raw agony of his ancient bond being surgically severed by the null point energy. The Iron Fang Council, suddenly facing a leader paralyzed by internal trauma, descended into immediate snarling disarray. The fortress, designed around the absolute authority of its alpha, had become a ship without a rudder. Lyra, dizzy, weak, and reeling from the massive output of her power, stood over the convulsing king, her white robes stained with the dark energy of the binding magic. Her victory was tactical, not complete. "The king has been struck by the null!" an ancient council member roared, his voice thick with fear and superstition. The paralysis lasted only seconds. Vara, the female beta, recovered instantly. Her loyalty to the pack and its structure was absolute, overriding even the shock of Kalen's downfall. She saw Lyra not as a queen, but as the rogue weapon that had devastated her king. Vara let out a chilling, territorial snarl and launched herself toward Lyra. "You broke him, human! You will pay the price of treason!" The fight was brutal, a desperate clash between Lyra's failing stamina and Vara's raw shifter strength. Vara's blows were fast, designed to neutralize, not kill. She needed the asset alive. But Lyra, the surgeon, fought with the precision of someone who understood physics and weak points. She ducked under a savage claw swipe, avoiding the initial tear. Her weakness was physical, but her advantage was knowledge. She knew the secret. Vara cornered her against the sacrificial altar, her amber eyes blazing with lethal intent. As the beta lunged for Lyra's throat, Lyra channeled her remaining meager golden energy into her palm, focusing on the silver-white frequency of the null point. She slapped her hand hard against Vara's exposed inner forearm, a rapid, precise contact. The silver-white energy surged, not to heal the flesh, but to surgically deactivate the core mechanism of the beta's power. Vara instantly staggered back, screaming, not from pain, but from the sudden terrifying sensation of mortality. The wound Lyra had just inflicted, a shallow, tearing cut from Vara's own claw on her forearm during the scuffle, refused to close. Blood welled up, red and sticky, clinging to the skin like a human injury. Vara's legendary regeneration was gone. "You're human!" Vara gasped, staring in horror at her bleeding arm, the wound refusing to knit. The shock of being rendered vulnerable was a psychological blow more devastating than any physical assault. "No," Lyra countered, already moving away, conserving her strength. "I am the null point, and you are now a patient for the human world." At that precise moment, The final, desperate phase of the Crescent Pack's infiltration began. A secondary breach was forced in the crypt's ceiling. A figure dropped into the chaos, agile and controlled. Alpha Torvin, the rival king, his pelt a rich silver gray. Torvin took one look at the paralyzed Kalen and the paralyzed council, then his eyes snapped to Lyra. He smiled, a genuine, relieved expression that held no malice, only conviction. "The matriarch has done what she must," Torvin announced to the shocked Iron Fang remnants. He extended his hand to Lyra, the gesture a clear offer of salvation and political allegiance. "Come, Weaver, the prophecy is redeemed. Lead the Crescent Pack into balance. Take the true crown." Lyra looked at Torvin's hand. He offered peace. He offered a gentle leash. But in his eyes, she saw the same light of ownership she had seen in Kalen's, the conviction that her power belonged to a pack, and her destiny belonged to a king. Lyra Vance had spent her life adhering to an oath that meant she belonged to no one but her conscience. She had just used her power to destroy the foundation of one king's dominion. She wouldn't submit to another. "Thank you, Alpha Torvin," Lyra said. Her voice tired but absolute. She ignored his extended hand. "But I swore a vow. The war is not between your crown and his. The war is between all kings and the power they seek to bind." She turned from him and the fallen Kalen, using the last of her energy to slip past the paralyzed council. She left the crypt through the shattered door, vanishing into the smoke and shadows of the compromised fortress. Torvin did not pursue her. He stood over the collapsing Kalen, realizing the terrifying magnitude of Lyra's decision. She had chosen to be a free weapon. Lyra emerged from the fortress and into the pre-dawn forest, ignoring the scattered shifter patrols. The golden heat in her hands was now a low, controllable hum, a permanent, potent consciousness of her lethal potential. She had the knowledge, the power, and the terrifying designation of the null point. She was not a queen. She was a sovereign weapon who chose her own targets, the self-proclaimed enemy of all who sought to bind her power, disappearing into the shadows of the human world to rewrite the ancient laws of shifter kind. The age of the kings was over. The reign of the Weaver had begun. Before you go, remember to tap the subscribe button to get more stories like this and more every time we release a new one. And let us know where you're watching from.